we always say fertility is a picture of, is a reflection of the entire picture, right? And
Yeah.
I think, man, that is such a critical understanding for people. And if you're having trouble with fertility, there is something going on. Fertility and vitality are hand in hand. And this is our fertility onion, Reagan. How many of these have to do with the sex, like the reproductive and sex hormone system? It's
I mean, just one so far directly, right? The hormone
right.
and estrogen, but everything else is like it's brilliant because where do most fertility clinics focus on? They just focus on the one thing. Let's get you pregnant, get you out. We'll get the next person in.
Everything's normal, but I can't get pregnant. If they're saying those words, but I can't get pregnant or I can't maintain the pregnancy, not everything's normal. It is certainly far from normal. So a massive part gets missed. So a lot of times when we're talking to people, they're like, "Yeah, I just can't get pregnant." I'm like, "No, that should never be an acceptable answer to anybody."
Hey, everybody, welcome to Unreasonable Health. And this is the show where we give you exposure to some of the world's leading experts in health, entrepreneurism, success, and everything else that's interesting. And today we've got my good dear friend, Dr. Dan Kellams, back. And Dr. Dan is somebody who is an expert in functional medicine. I've listened to the world's leaders in reading functional blood chemistry. I've learned from them, and there's nobody who is more entertaining and educational and smart than Dr. Dan. Not only is he the founder of Peak Vitality in Denver, Colorado, but he's also created his own courses through the Go Wellness Collaborative. He's got courses on functional blood chemistry, courses on oncology, courses on endocrinology, and it's some of the best material that you'll find in the functional medicine world. And today we're going to be diving deep into his specialty, which is getting other men's women pregnant. I mean, fertility. so, Dan, welcome back to the show. So good to have you here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be on. We always have, some very thought-provoking conversation, and I'm always interested in where the conversations can go, but I love being here. And that working with you is always such a pleasure of mine.
Yeah, there's no one else who I'd rather talk about healthcare and just have conversations with than you. So thanks for being such a great friend. And tell us what is your secret for getting other men's women pregnant? Several times a day is what I've heard.
Yeah, I think if there was going to be like a secret sauce, it's two major concepts. And the first is, the body's always going to choose survival over fertility every time. And so, and when you take that and you apply it to the second concept is, most of the time when you have practitioners that are focused on fertility, they're focused on the reproductive tract and sex hormones. And
Mm.
that is one very small portion of the picture. And so you truly have to look at the whole health of the person. And that's why a lot of the situations where someone's doing IUI or IVF, those still fail or they will get pregnant and they can't maintain the pregnancy. And, it's something you and I had talked about is, you have to look at a couple different pieces and kind of segment this. You have to say, okay, what's more important? Do you want to get pregnant? Do you want to stay pregnant? Or do you want to be able to have that child and you and that child have your health after that baby's born? And those are
Mm.
three different segments.
Totally
And
different.
most
Yeah.
people, yeah. And so most people are going to say, well, how do I choose one? And you shouldn't have to, but it's important to realize the body goes through phases. Each one of those phases requires different things. So it's not just about the ability to get pregnant. It's about reducing risk factors during pregnancy and then maintaining health after that pregnancy. And there's this concept of something called fetal origin of adult disease. And it's while that baby is in utero, the slightest things that are off in that mother can impact that child for the rest of their life. And those things that can be shifted and that we can alter. And so you have to look at every part and realize that if someone's struggling with any of those three, the body is choosing a survival mechanism over a fertility mechanism, then you would, that switch is something we don't want to see. So we have to dig in and find out what's actually going on.
Because preferentially the body, obviously we can survive without being able to reproduce. But and this is where a lot of people just think it's my reproductive system that's not working. And it's like, well, let's just not focus on that. Why is it not working? And I think that's where you're brilliant. So what are the main interferences you see that get in the way of fertility?
Well, I think one of the first and the easiest thing is some nutritional deficiencies. We have around 44 essential nutrients, and that could be, you could argue over that specific number, but you have to have those. And we always say it's real simple. If you don't have enough for you, how do you have enough for two? And I think that's an incredible piece. And like they found, there's research that shows, these are longitudinal studies that show that if a mother has low vitamin D during pregnancy, it can affect the baby for the first 24 years of that baby's life.
Wow.
That's rough.
Wow.
So, yeah. And so, how do you know you have a nutritional deficiency? Well, you're not going to feel it per se. You might feel a severe iron deficiency, but I don't know what a vitamin A deficiency feels like or a vitamin K deficiency. But so you have to look at those essential nutrients. And if they are low, you have to find out why. Is it intake, absorption, or loss, right?
So that means like someone could be eating adequate amounts. I mean, they may say, oh, I take all the supplements and I'm doing all the right things, that my diet's clean, whatever that means. And but they may not be absorbing it, right?
Right. Yeah. And you don't know, you can't say like, you and I look at a labs all the time and we eat really good and we take supplements, we do peptides and we do all these lifestyle factors, but our labs always look different. And we're doing the same, we're doing essentially a lot of the same stuff. And it's like, okay, well, what you need and what your body demands and what your body is efficient at doing is completely different than what it is for me. And it's the same when we go through and looking at these fertility cases, is these mothers, they want to do what their friend did or what an influencer on the internet has said, hey, this is what got me pregnant. That's just usually not the case.
And I think that your approach is refreshing because it's looking at the root cause and actually helping not just the couple conceive, but it actually is looking far beyond that, because you're the one that shared this with me, which is, and correct me if I'm wrong, you'll be more articulate with it, but it's the food that your grandparents ate that actually influenced the health of the child now. So it's what you and I, what our grandparents were eating is what, basically influenced our health. And so talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so that's on that generational side. And this goes right along with your question of like, what are the things that we're seeing? So one of the other big things that we look at is the gut microbiome and the bacteria and the composition of that bacteria has massive impacts. And you just real simply, I mean, the gut is in the abdomen and so is the reproductive organs. And there is a huge effect from one to the other, but we can track. So this generational health aspect that we focus on when we're going back in generations is two-pronged. One, like you're saying, what our grandparents ate influences us for a multitude of factors because it primes these DNA pathways, right? It activates the epigenome. But, when your mother was pregnant, and before she was pregnant, she had her eggs. and you were already there. And when she was born with all of those eggs. So what your grandmother was doing, before your mother was born, already impacted your life. It highlighted and activated these genes. And we can see this in studies with pesticides and free radicals and oxidative stressors and stress hormones. They prime these genetic pathways. So if, like, your grandmother was really a stressed out individual, well, when your mother was developing her eggs, they were all influenced to prime a person to survive in a more stressful environment. So you stay high wired that way. But what
Wow.
they're eating is also feeding that epigenome and activating these factors that are going to be highlighted and actually come to fruition when you were born. But also, so outside of the foods and the emotional and psychological status of grandparents, also that gut bacteria. The research, we can track gut bacteria 3 generations on both sides of the family. So there's a
Wow.
massive generational impact. And so what someone has to think about when they're pregnant or when they're trying to get pregnant or even considering it is their diet, their lifestyle, and then these internal factors, their stress hormones, their nutritional status, the microbiome. All of these things are not only going to be passed on through genetic activation, but also through the microbiome passing on these bacteria. So you pass on both. So that's like your real heritage, right? It's genetics and bacteria. It's so fascinating to think about.
Wow. So talk about a couple of people who you've helped. And because I've seen your case studies. Dan is our creative director at Go Wellness. And so his case studies are phenomenal. But maybe you could share a couple of examples of where people had tried IVF or other therapies that had failed, and they came to see you as a last resort, which is usually what happens, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
All the tough cases end up at peak vitality. And so maybe you could share a couple of stories, and then I want to talk about your 3-phase process that you take families through or couples through.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the big things that we see, and this goes back to, like, some of the big key factors, is autoimmunity. And
Mm.
so we've had multiple cases, and one case individual, Tracy, she had come in and she's very open sharing her story. So um, she's given permission to share her name, but Tracy came in and she had she had tried she'd had this is interesting because she had a child, and when she was much younger, when she was in early 20s, no problem. And as she got a little bit older, she started struggling. That's actually kind of a story that we see quite a bit. But she had something unique that was going on that's actually shared with a lot of couples who have tried getting, pregnant or conceiving and still weren't able to, even if they'd never had a child before. But she's in her mid-30s, trying for a child. Life seemed like it was right for her, and she felt good, exercised pretty regularly. Didn't know, if you looked at her, you wouldn't think there was anything going on. She could not get pregnant, and her anti-Müllerian hormone, which is a good blood serum marker of your ovarian reserve, was starting to deplete pretty quickly, faster than you typically see, but no explanation as to what was going on. And she came in and we started looking, and sure enough, she had some opportunistic pathogens in her gut. And the gut is super confusing because the bacteria there can be in a person who's healthy, but it's all about context of what else is going on in the picture of the gut. And so we found some inflammatory markers that were slightly elevated. So the gut was shifted, not in such a severe way that she had, any major symptoms of, like, gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation. But what was really interesting is she did have a family history of some thyroid autoimmunity, and she had very low amount of thyroid antibodies, but her thyroid was fine. But
Yeah.
what she did have was antibodies toward her own ovaries.
Mm.
And so they were called anti-ovarian antibodies. And so her gut, because it was disrupted, and that's what helps regulate that immune response, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that we see a lot. You and I have talked about these cases before, but because her gut was disrupted and now had been, and I'll come back to this because this is really interesting, but because her gut was disrupted, she didn't have the immune regulatory functions necessary to dampen down these antibodies that were just slowly attacking her ovaries. So anytime eggs would
Wow.
come out, they were being damaged. And so her ovarian, reserve was declining. And so, that's a case that you have to actually treat as as an autoimmune case, not necessarily an infertility case. There was some
Yeah.
really good research. Can I share my screen?
Oh yeah, please.
Awesome. Perfect. This was an incredible research article, autoimmune diseases with premature ovarian insufficiency. And the
Hmm.
number is outrageous, like anywhere from 4 to 30% of
Wow.
premature ovarian insufficiency is autoimmune in origin. And
Hmm.
what's interesting about this, and for anybody who's listening or watching, this isn't just about having anti-ovarian antibodies. Any type of antibodies to the thyroid causing, hypothyroidism, even if they don't know it, Hashimoto's, Graves, adrenal, they found that any autoimmunity can cause an accumulation of immune cells in these ovarian thecal cells, and that damages that ovarian reserve. So the autoimmune and the connection there is the gut. The gut was one of
Wow.
the major deciding factors in driving that process. So what we did is, and she didn't have any, it was super confusing because we had this conversation like, we need to look at your gut. She's like, I don't have any gut issues. So we did the labs and we
Yeah.
found this disrupted gut. We got it under control, and those antibodies started dropping down. There was a slight improvement in ovarian reserve, and she was able
Wow.
to conceive. So it was incredible. But it was like looking at those things. But you know what was the one unique thing that stood out? She did have some slight nutritional deficiencies because her gut was compromised.
There it is.
Yeah.
Yet eating healthy and doing all the right things, but and that's the genius of Dr. Dan, is he's got the ability of turning over every stone and really finding out where the interferences are and what may keep you from conceiving, but doing it in a way that gets people healthy. Because what would you say the biggest mistake is in infertility, where if you could talk to somebody before they do a certain thing, my personal thing is when people do IVF, I think it's way like that needs to be far removed. They need to work on the foundations first. Maybe
Yeah.
that's IVF, but what's some of the worst things people do, and how can we help them prevent the mistakes?
Yeah. Well, I think the worst thing you could do is assume the presence of health in the lack of symptoms, right? So
Wow.
people assuming that they're healthy or they have a healthy status that's enough to maintain a pregnancy or feed a whole, the development of a whole child. We don't think about it, but that spark of life, right? All that mitochondria, all this energy that is required. If you have even suboptimal energy levels, there's going to be a problem there. But one, not, you can't assume the presence of health. You have to know, right? That's our test, don't guess. You have to know that it's there. The second is making the assumption that the fertility issue is specific to the reproductive tract. And that's where you have to expand beyond you know that whole idea. We always say fertility is a picture, is reflection of the entire picture, right? And
Yeah.
I think, man, that is such a critical understanding for people. And if you're having trouble with fertility, there is something going on. Fertility and vitality are hand in hand.
Mm.
Body is, typically making a choice. So one, don't assume that you do have the health necessary. You got to get the right testing, and it needs to go beyond hormones, because when you go to a reproductive specialist, they're going to look at FSH and LH, maybe AMH. They're going to look at the sex hormones. They're going to look at progesterone and estradiol. And I think this is where the assumption, that second assumption, is so important. You can run those labs on the third day of your cycle or day 21 if you want to get a picture of progesterone. And those labs might look really good. Those numbers, and they say, okay, you're totally set up, you're ovulating. But, in the hormone pathways, we don't know how well their body's responding to those. We don't know how much they're recycling those hormones and those hormone metabolites. We don't know what the proteomic response from the cells is actually. So that is actually a horrible picture. And until you have the full picture, it's like falsely positive, right? So
Yeah.
that's where people are stumped. Like, everything's normal, but I can't get pregnant. If they're saying those words, but I can't get pregnant, or I can't maintain the pregnancy, not everything's normal. It is certainly far from normal. So a massive part gets missed. So a lot of times when we're talking to people, they're like, yeah, I just can't get pregnant. I'm like, no, that should never be an acceptable answer to anybody.
Man, well said. And so let's talk about the process. So somebody engages, they say, hey, we want to have healthy family. You have a very unique process that you've mastered over the last decade, that nobody else does it the way you do it. But can you talk about that a little bit, and about what people can expect when they work with you?
Yeah, so usually, we like people to watch the webinar because it helps them understand this process, and especially the why behind it. It's really hard to take. It's just like anytime somebody talks to you, you're like, tell me everything you know, and you're like, well, but you just opening up a black hole of just raw data being thrown at you. But the first step is, we usually have someone watch the webinar and then sit down with our case manager. And when they fill out that intake paperwork and meet with the case manager, they're going to go through their health history and some really key things like their energy levels, their digestive health, their sleep, and their reproductive, like menstrual cycles. And for men, libido, I will tell you, talking about something that's overlooked, if you don't have good sex drive, if your libido is not good, there's a problem with your reproductive issue, right? There's a reproductive problem, right? So I cannot tell you how many people, they're trying to get pregnant and their libido is gone. And you're like, hold on. That is the primal instinct that drives fertility. You cannot overlook that.
It drives more than just fertility, Dan.
Right? Well, yes.
Drive,
yeah. It's a very powerful motivator. But
yes.
Yeah, so that's a huge piece, and we need to note that, right? It's like it's a key piece of feeling good. So the once we do that and we've looked at the intake paperwork, the team and I will meet before that to look at their intake. And so when they meet with the case manager is asking very directed questions to understand them, because the first step is to get the right labs. And sometimes it may not seem like those labs are appropriate, but we're looking at genetic testing, we're looking at the microbiome, we're looking at hormones. And when we say hormones, we're looking at all these metabolites so we know where those hormones are actually being fed in the body. And we're looking at all these inflammatory markers as well, and essential nutrients. So the idea is to, without beyond a shadow of a doubt, have an accurate picture of how every aspect of this particular person's body works. And that's the first step, right? So then we go, okay, we know this person. And then the second step is then once you have that and you can analyze it and go through their health history and their family history, then what you can do is match those up and develop a very, very unique plan to start to step them through the process. And that plan needs to then be based on, what their goals. If some people do come to us and say, look, I just want to get pregnant. I'm not too worried about down the road. Well, that's fine. We can work with you to, get you pregnant to the best of our ability. And then, then if their goal is to get pregnant, stay pregnant, because reoccurring miscarriages is a really common issue. So for those people, we're working 4 to 8 months with them. But the people who are wanting to, they're wanting the long-term health for them and their children, like 8 to 12 months is really a great trajectory. But a lot of people, they can come in and we go, oh, 4 months is all you need. This is going to get you where you need to. But it's all about developing an individualized plan based on their genetics, their lab work, their health history, and what their experience has been. And then that third step is we have that collaborative team, and our team starts breaking everything down, and we do something that we call peeling the onion. And we found this is very, very specific to fertility, and it's going through the right phases at the right time. This is the onion, and you have to hit through these things at the right time in the right order. And I think what we found is a lot of people have worked through these phases, or they're doing things that were right, they just weren't the right time to do it, or it was out of order. And so that's our process. And what's really important as you peel that onion back is to get retesting to make sure that you're making the right changes and supporting both the mother, these healthy eggs, and getting them to be able to conceive. And I'm saying mothers, but we do this with men as well, because, men play a huge part as 50% of it, right? And so infertility cases are like 30% the female, 30% the male, and then 30 to 40% both. And so we have to work through each one of those, but that is really a key process, and it's all based on what their symptoms have been and what their labs come back and show us. And I will tell you, we spend most of our time outside of the reproductive tract working on infertility, and that's where we get our success.
Man, how crazy is that? Well, let's go back to peeling the onion. Can you share that again? Because a lot of people are just going to be listening to this. And I just, because you create the most brilliant processes and simplify things. So you've got at the center of it is the DNA, and the DNA is the architecture for your biology and for life, essentially. Yeah. And so outside of the DNA is mitochondria. How does mitochondria relate to fertility?
Well, this is energy, and we're working from, you and I are talking inside out. And what we found is we have to work from the outside in to get down, because, the DNA is, these epigenetics are being influenced by everything outside of the DNA, right? Because we're not going to change the DNA itself, but we are going to affect the genetic responses, these genetic elements. So, but mitochondria is such a huge piece, Regan. The energy, it takes a lot of energy to do anything your body's going to do. Everything that it does requires ATP or energy. And when we talk about the highest concentrations of mitochondria in the body, the ovaries actually have the highest between men and women. Other than the prefrontal cortex of our brains, the ovaries have the highest density of mitochondria. And it's like, it takes a ton of energy to make a new life. And so that's why mitochondria is such a critical piece. So energy levels and understanding energy is really, really an important piece to that. So that's where the mitochondria come in play.
Got it. And so we'll start on the outside. So immune challenges, you mentioned autoimmunity, and especially autoimmunity to the thyroid, not just autoimmunity to the ovaries. What about men and immune challenges? What do you see there?
Well, so immune challenges are anything that's creating inflammation or oxidative stress on the body, right? So you want to know free radicals, and you want to know what the immune system's doing. Is there infections, inflammation, or toxicity? And these are really, really important, because a lot of people have, and this because you and I run so many labs, and how many people have inflammation and don't even know it, right? They expect a symptom, and we'll find significant amounts of inflammation and they're asymptomatic. But with men, oxidative stress or inflammation actually damage the testicular blood barrier. And, you've heard of the blood-brain
Wow.
barrier and the gut barrier. Well, you actually get like leaky testicles, right? So
Jeez.
all these inflammatory chemicals get in there and they shut down Leydig cells. And those are the cells that produce testosterone that then can drive spermatogenesis and the Sertoli cells of the testicles. So, but this happens with the ovarian barrier as well. So, immune challenges, they directly damage the reproductive tract in men and women, but they also indirectly influence how the sex hormones work, how everything else in the body's going. And this can drive autoimmunity and be secondary. And there's tons of secondary drivers of infertility due to inflammation, infection, and toxicity. And to this day, haven't had a single person come in that didn't have a challenge in that area.
Wow. Fascinating. And the second one is the gut microbial balance. So, and I think healing the immune system, healing the gut, those go in tandem, as does the detoxification and biotransformation. So how do those three what are some things that people can do like right now on their own to help with their immune system, their gut microbial balance, and their detoxification and biotransformation?
Yeah, so I would say immediately, like two simple things that they could do is get a good glutathione product,
Mm.
or a good probiotic, because a probiotic is going to affect all three. It's going to, because the immune system is regulated by the gut. It's going to improve the balance. It's going to make it harder for invasive species to overgrow or opportunistic pathogens to overgrow. And then it's also going to, the gut is the third phase to detoxification. So having a probiotic, a really healthy probiotic for women, they definitely want Lactobacillus rhamnosus in that lineup. But having a good probiotic and then glutathione. So glutathione helps with the immune system. It tightens the junctions in the gut, so it stops the leaky barriers, all barriers, blood-brain barrier, testicular barrier, ovarian barrier, pulmonary barrier. But it also, it's the master antioxidant used by the liver and mitochondria for detoxification. So those are really easy go-tos, right?
Wow. Okay, let's talk about elimination discovery. What does that mean?
So what we find is, when we start working with somebody, when you have minimized their diet to reduce any type of toxicity or challenge or extra load on the body, when you like really get them eating clean, you can start adding things back in. And when you do, you find that people have some really individual specific responses. And so that has to be very careful, because the last thing you want to do, especially in the terms of fertility, is to create low levels of inflammation or immune responses due to foods or food proteins or food additives. And sometimes it's what you would think would be harmless. So it's citrus fruits are really strangely like a common inflammatory driver for a lot of people. So, you just take your time through that and see like, hey, what is unique to you?
Wow. Yeah, 'cause even the low FODMAP diet, I mean, a lot of people don't realize like they eat an apple and 3 hours later they're like got really painful abdominal cramps and gas, and it's like it's an apple. It's like, yeah, well, there's some species in your gut, and so that makes sense on the elimination. Genetic dietary support, and this is where you run really advanced genetic profiles, so you can actually like give people selective advice based on their genetics. Is that what that genetic dietary support means?
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of times, and I've seen a lot of videos on this of people say, oh, there's this. You remember way back in the day. I mean, we're talking almost a decade ago, we were talking about MTHFR and COMT.
Yep.
And, you find that usually like one of those genes by itself doesn't have that big of an impact. But when you put them in combination, because these are low penetrance genes, which means they don't have that huge of an effect. However, these genes work in groupings, and it's those groupings that have high penetrance because they have massive impacts. And so these are really, really unique to the individual. So you want to know, you want to be able to identify your most disrupted groupings and how can you support those with diet, lifestyle, nutrition. And that's what this phase is about. And this is super important because, those genetic elements that we were talking about that get activated, they get activated due to deficiencies or, you know, foods that aren't meant for your body. Like for me, remember back in the day when I did keto and it actually spiked my insulin.
Right.
That's good to know because, if you're spiking your blood sugar inadvertently from like a ketogenic diet, for instance, you're going to activate obesity genes in your child. So you want to know what your genes do for you and your child.
Wow. Wow. That's important. I don't think that there's any parent listening to this right now or future parent that would want to give their kid obesity genes. So
Yeah, no, you don't want
pretty
to activate
critical.
that. Yeah,
Man.
yeah,
So let's peel back. The next layer is hormone and endocrine support. And this is interesting because, testosterone, you don't necessarily want to be on testosterone if you're trying to increase sperm count. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit, and then let's dive into this layer of the onion.
yeah. So this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but to try to simplify this, we have six major concepts with hormones. You have to be able to make a hormone, right? You have to be able to then carry that hormone to its specific organ tissue. So you have these carrier proteins. You have to be able to stimulate that tissue through a receptor site. And some of these receptors are on the DNA themselves, especially in the case of like thyroid hormone. Then you have to be able to, that hormone is going to break down. You got to be able to remove those hormone metabolites, which are the most powerful endocrine disruptor over any chemical or plastic or anything. So leftover hormones that aren't properly removed from the body are way more damaging to these pathways. Some of these hormones are actually recycled. So you got recycling, and then you have to have the feedback loop. So this regulatory. So we say make, take, stimulate, remove, recycle, regulate. So all of these are, and the reason it's at this layer is because the removal and the production is dependent on the liver, the gut, and your nutrition. And those receptor sites are all affected by the immune challenges. So you have to work through these layers to get to this layer of the onion. And for like men, like testosterone. So a lot of men, they'll look and labs show their total testosterone's low. And instead of asking the question, why is it low? Is it triggering? Are the receptors working? Is the body rebalancing? They just want to rush in and give men like testosterone, producing or bioidenticals. And so the problem with that is if you're above the amount that your body typically needs, your recycling or your feedback loops, your pituitary will shut down the production of testosterone in your own testicles. And that also will shut down your spermatogenesis or the production of semen. So, it can be a real problem. If you talk to any man that's been on testosterone, they'll tell you the volume and the size of their testicles actually shrinks. And so part of that is lack of semen production. And so it's the same thing with women, not being able to clear the hormones or identify specifically why the hormones are off. And this is, I think the craziest thing is in those 6 pathways, there's multiple chances for the hormone levels that you measure in blood to be normal and all the rest of the pathways to be disrupted. And that's why you have to have the full picture before you decide that the hormones are good or bad.
Got it. Wow, fascinating. And so this is where make sure that if you are planning on having kids but you also have low testosterone, get in touch with Dan or somebody who knows about the endocrine system in more detail, because there's a lot of people doing testosterone therapy the wrong way is what I found. And so the next layer is the vascular and respiratory support. Now, tell me the connection with these two.
So with fertility, it's one, you got to have good oxygen deliverability, right? So your blood, your blood cells, your hematocrit, your hemoglobin, your ability to carry oxygen, all these things have to be very optimal. But vascular, what you find if you've had disrupted hormones, even your gut, if your gut's been disrupted, it can produce a chemical called trimethylene oxide. So trimethylamine oxide damages your vascular lining, but also inflammation and oxidative stress. So there's something in every layer of the onion that if it's not cleared, damages your blood vessels. So if you damage your blood vessels, immediately, like we were talking earlier, everything becomes leaky. The testicular barrier, the ovarian barrier, all of these barriers become leaky. And you even, if we said the blood-brain barrier, you're going to stress your pituitary, and then your stress hormones will shut down fertility in that mechanism. But you have to have the integrity of these barriers. But circulation is super important for the delivery of oxygen and micronutrients and a proper immune balance so that the body can actually function. And so for a woman, trying to get pregnant, you got to have really optimal regulated blood flow to the uterine wall to build up a healthy endometrial lining. So for men and women, excellent circulation with low inflammation and what's called endothelial dysfunction is something that we have to look at in order to make sure that they can actually get pregnant. And what's crazy is like when we're looking at the onion here, and this is our fertility onion, Regan, how many of these have to do with the sex, like the reproductive and sex hormone system?
I mean, just one so far directly, right? The hormone
right.
and endocrine, but everything else is like, it's brilliant because where do most fertility clinics focus on? They just focus on the one thing. Let's get you pregnant, get you out. We'll get the next person in. And IVF is incredibly pricey.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not only that, but you're compromising the health of yourself, especially as a mother, and you're compromising the health of your baby because babies who are IVF babies have weakened immune systems. It's very well documented. There's also more complications with pregnancy.
Yeah. And that's I can't tell you, I could almost put names on every layer of couples that have come into us and they've either done IUI or IVF, or they've just been trying naturally to get pregnant. They haven't tried anything else. And I could put names in every layer of where they had to get to in order to get pregnant. A lot of them, we never even had to get down to hormone or endocrine. It was the gut or the immune challenges, because everyone has their own story and this is their roadmap. And where they fall on that roadmap is going to determine how close they are to success with their fertility.
Man, well, this is brilliant because then you go through brain and nervous system, cells, tissue, and organ system. So it's broadening just a little bit, but let's talk about that real quick. And then metabolism.
Yeah. So when we start digging into the brain and nervous system, the gut is such a critical piece here. And you're going to find that, your brain-derived neurotropic factor, your VIP, all these neuropeptides and neurotransmitters are gut-derived. And as you go through and you repair the hormones, you repair the gut, you get the nutritional status where it needs to be, and you get those barriers, the blood-brain barrier, the blood barrier is correct, the nervous system starts to operate a heck of a lot better. And the regulation, your brain is taking all this feedback and regulating that hypothalamus to stimulate the pituitary, to regulate your releasing hormones and then stimulating hormones. And it's that pattern. And if the nervous system is off because of stress hormones or neuroinflammation, that's going to be a barrier. But by the time you usually get this deep, a lot of those issues have been resolved. Now, there's a few people that what's particular to them, we kind of have to hit upon some of these inner circles while we're working on the outer layers. But then cells, tissues, and organs, and what we typically find is because like with the testicles or the uterus, the cervical fluid, all these different things need a little bit of special attention. And for certain men or women, when we get to this, this layer, there's still some work that needs to be done on specific areas of their body. And so this gives us a chance to give some extra support in those areas that was particular to them because of the combination of issues they had. And then the last piece is really ramping up their metabolism and their mitochondria. A lot of people don't need to get this far, but others we do. It's like, okay, we got to get that spark back. We got to work. And this is where now that your body has all this support and it's been properly supported for several months, you can really optimize long-term energy for the rest of their life and improve, their longevity. And that's where we're getting into that generational health piece.
Yeah. And that's brilliant because at the end of the day, if you do an IVF treatment or if you go down the traditional pathway, you may get pregnant, but you may actually damage your health in the process.
Yeah.
What you do is you've created an entire protocol, an entire system where you've helped dozens, if not hundreds of couples have great pregnancies, but not only great pregnancies, but they get healthier in the like you're working on your body's health, which is like, what a better way to start a family than to get your body optimized or to add another member to your family and welcome them into the world with optimal health. I mean, whether you're a father or a mother, it just makes a lot of sense. And I love the energy you put into that. So if you look at peeling the onion and that whole roadmap that you take somebody through, what would be the best way for somebody to get in touch with you, Dan, and to start working with you?
Yeah. So, they can get on our website, peakvitalitydenver.com. And we have a little jot form on there. They can fill that out. And that goes right to our new patient coordinator. And she can start that process and get the ball rolling. We do like people to either watch a peak process. But if someone, has watched this this video or listen to the podcast, they can just let them know and we can get them set up to talk to one of our specialty case managers and get that process going. Or they can find us on social media. Peak Vitality's on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. But the best thing to do is just go to peakvitalitydenver.com or give us a call at 720-504-8007. And there's a line on there for new patients to get started. So that's the process. We try to make it fairly simple. I always tell people, the fertility is a complex issue and it's unique to you. And the solution, it doesn't have to be complex, but it does have to be unique to you. And that's what we're after is what is the unique solution for couples that they need in order to get those elements in the right place so they can conceive.
Man. Well, the genius of what you've done is you've created a process where you understand that in some people, you just peel back the layer of the immune system, you correct the immune system, boom, conception happens pretty darn fast, and then you're working through the health process. Other people, you may have to peel back a few more layers, but at the end of the day, you're creating a healthier generational potential for families. I mean, imagine setting up your kid, not just your kids, but your grandkids for better health. And then you're going to learn skills from Dan and his team that will help you share that for future generations. So this is much better than leaving an inheritance because you're actually leaving a heritage, which is so much more meaningful.
Yeah, it's been amazing, and speaking along the lines of generational health, a lot of times when we get these labs in and we sit down with couples or individuals, while we're looking at it and we start putting this together, we can either say, well, if they already had a child, we're looking at their gut and we're like, wow, hey, by the way, because of this bacteria composition in your gut, do you have a child that has ADHD? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. Well, we know what we need to do to help that child. Or we say, hey, do you have a parent that has autoimmune or has these symptoms? And they're like, yeah. So, they'll bring in their parents or their grandparents or their children. And that's the generational impact is, we work on you. reverse the damage that your grandparents might have created that you didn't know was there, set your children up for future health. And then we're looking at like maintaining those relationships with people throughout their lifetime, because we want to get them healthy and keep them, healthy. So
Yeah.
it's a wonderful process.
Try having a great relationship with your family when you feel like crap all the time. It's
Yeah,
it's just
right.
really hard, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, this is a true version of healthcare. And so, Dan, thanks for all your phenomenal insights today. I learned, as always, I learned a ton from you, and can't wait to have you back on the show. Any final words or anything that I didn't ask you that maybe I should have?
No, I think the biggest takeaway is don't assume health or fertility, and if you're told everything's normal and they don't know why, it just means they don't know why. That's all that means. It doesn't mean everything's normal. And I think and if someone is wanting to just have a healthy pregnancy, that's when you want to look. You don't want to wait till there's a problem. You want to understand your health before you have to rely on your health.
Well said, man. Well, that was exciting. And so, for those of you who love the show, make sure you share it with your friends, family, loved ones, and go ahead and leave us a 5-star review. It helps us get found on other platforms so you can hear more and more engaging conversations like this. Dan, thanks again for being here.
Oh, this is great. Thank you so much. And I look forward to the next one.
Awesome.